All right. Our guest today, we're very happy to have Paul Adams, Industrial Hemp Program Manager from the state of North Carolina. Paul, how are you today?
I'm well, Stephen. Glad to be here. Interested and excited to talk about him.
Awesome. Yeah, we're glad to have you too. So I always like to start just by hearing about your story. How'd you get to North Carolina Department of Ag and why hemp?
Well, I got to Department of Ag really via my master's advisor. Her husband worked for the North Carolina Department of Ag as the state entomologist, and I was, doing my master's at entomology at the time. I wrapped that up, and he needed hand with a project working with sweet potato weevil, actually, and I joined that program, worked with it for a while, transitioned into working with red imported fire ant, and then ultimately landed a permanent position as a plant protection specialist, a bit of a custom position in regards to what I did specifically, because I did a lot of aid for the existing specialists, and I helped them accomplish things in their territories, and had some other research objectives that they didn't really have. Um, and I guess you could say I had a lot of flexibility in my job title, and the woman who had been running the hemp program in its very early stages she took a different position with a university, and they needed somebody to run it. And because I had the space, they came to me and said, "Hey, I need you to take on this industrial hemp behemoth that we've sort of, that's landed in our lap," and it landed in my lap. And then I guess about a year later, they created a formal industrial hemp program manager position, and I had already been doing it, so I was really a shoe in, and that's how we got here. So
That's awesome. Did you ever know what really you were getting yourself into at the time?
I had no clue, but I can tell you, I remember the exact day that they called me into the office to tell me I'd be working in industrial hemp, and it was June 7th of 2018. So it's no looking back from there.
Right. And remind me, had the program started yet in pilot form, or were you kind of you were at the gate?
The program had formally started, so we actually had plants in the ground in 2017, but not in a big way. 2018 was probably really the first year where the program started to grow leaps and bounds, and I picked up, I guess you could say, yeah, it would have been early to mid planting season of that year, and again, no turning back from there. Just had to do it, had to figure it out.
Absolutely. I feel like that's hemp in general, from farmers to regulators to everyone, kind of flying as we go here. So
Absolutely.
how has the program been going since you came on? Give me kind of the synopsis of where you guys have been and where you are now.
Well, our program, like anybody else, has started small initially. I think we had maybe 100 or so licensees, and come into 2017. In 2018, that number jumped to about 450. In 2019, that number jumped to 1,300, give or take. And at this point, we're somewhere around the 1,500 licensee mark. And of course, the acreage and the licensed greenhouse square feet has done nothing but grow as well. I think we're at currently just under 15,000 permitted acres and just under 7 million licensed greenhouse square feet. So the program has grown quite a bit. And, I think the program's doing well. It's sustaining itself. We've learned a lot. We've come a long way, but like anything else, it's an evolving process, and we've got places we need to go and things we need to accomplish as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about those places we're going in just a second. Issues that were going into 2020, and then also with COVID, it sounds like the numbers have kind of stayed fairly steady.
Uh, I mean, in terms of growth, this year specifically, it has slowed down, right?
Yeah,
And for many reasons, but yeah, I mean, we definitely sustained a heavy rate of growth for those early years, and I mean, there are still people interested. I've gotten 4 or 5 applications today, so there's no shortage of interest in hemp and in cannabis, and the program it keeps on going despite all of the issues, COVID and everything else. So we're still trucking.
That's excellent. What do you attribute that to in terms of your ability to continue facilitating that growth as a regulator?
Well, I think North Carolina did a really good job at not over regulating, at least to start. You can absolutely stifle, I believe, a new industry with regulation. In some ways, and I think North Carolina really kind of put it was really open to anybody at any scale, any farmer at any scale, and it just really just kind of let people go and do and try it. And we didn't put any limitations on the number of licenses. We didn't restrict, how many acres or greenhouse feet you had to have, or set a cap so that you couldn't have more than X amount. So I think that freedom really allowed the program to grow. And to sort of get some of those, maybe some of those issues of just having like a small program with not a lot of participants, like we got past those. So I think that's been really helpful, to sustaining our programming and keeping it, at the size that it is and even growing. So
Yeah. Um, how have the crops been? Are farmers happy, with the growing conditions in North Carolina for hemp itself?
I think so. It's kind of a loaded question, really, because hemp is, anybody who's listening to this probably knows, is one of the only commodities that we grow out there where we have a number benchmark that we can't exceed. So I think really anywhere in North Carolina, so long as it's not too wet, the soil's relatively well drained, hemp can grow here for sure. I think we have it in at least 93 of 100 counties. So I mean, North Carolina is fairly suitable to growing hemp, and we're having the same problems as any state in trying to get genetics that are specifically acclimated to our climate. But yeah, I mean, hemp grows just fine here, and as long as we're hitting those limits, I think or rather staying within those limits, I think the farmers are fairly happy with their chances. But
Yeah,
it's farming after all. So, I mean, it's not without risk, even in the best of circumstances.
absolutely. Have you guys seen any, like, to those risk standpoints? Like, I know pest pressure is always a thing. Have you guys seen any or documented any pests that are specifically kind of affecting hemp, or is it
Yeah,
no different than other crops?
we work really closely with our land grant universities here. So that's North Carolina A&T State and North Carolina State University, and they both have research programs working with hemp right now. I know, NC State. I actually know one of the doctors who's been looking into insect pests of industrial hemp, and there are some. The sort of ubiquitous corn earworm, it can be a problem in hemp. Mites are a problem pretty much in any crop, but they can be both a field and greenhouse pest for industrial hemp. And there are others. I think right now, assuming your hemp is in good condition, there doesn't seem to be any data to support like huge crop loss as a result of insect feeding. But they're definitely out there, and I think probably disease pressure is more important, based on sort of the data that we've seen here in North Carolina coming from the university. I think that has a greater potential to have a negative impact on yield, but again, that's largely due to the conditions of your hemp. If your hemp is not getting watered enough, or it's getting overwatered and it's stressed, then it's going to pick up those fungal pathogens, and it's going to be more susceptible to insect feeding. So I think really it's keep it watered, but not too much. Keep it happy, and for the most part, the plant will do what it needs to do, and you won't see too much in the way of loss from pests, either disease or insect.
Yeah. What about you mentioned education and in a way, and getting farmers in the know. Like, Do you find that the state farmers are like very collaborative? Is there industry groups they're working with kind of get up to speed on how to farm hemp properly? Is the resources you guys, give to them to figure it out?
So, the it's again, the university are great resources for us, and they're working not only on not only on insect and disease pressure, but also what are your best planting dates? What are cultivars that are consistently testing within the limit? What are spacings that are conducive to canopy closure to fight, say, weed pressure? So we're seeing a lot of that data too. Data on mulching and just sort of those agronomic practices that we can do, that farmers can do to sort of mitigate some of these risks, sort of your traditional agricultural risks. Um, but there are also industry groups. There at one time was the North Carolina Industrial Hemp Association. It has since merged with other states and become the Southeast Hemp Association. And that they act as a resource to farmers about direction and trying to help them navigate the world that is industrial hemp. And there are independent groups that are smaller that are working on various projects, whether it be fiber or other end uses for industrial hemp. So yeah, those groups have sort of formed themselves, and I think generically we in the university serve as sort of the basic resource for anyone who is interested in producing industrial hemp, whether that be the research, to grow hemp better, or whether you're just starting out and you need to know, like, what are the laws that I need to abide by, and what are the hoops I need to jump through to get a hemp license. So, I mean, certainly education and sort of hand in hand outreach has been very important to us in the pre-COVID world. We did a ton of events at county extension offices, at universities, at trade shows, where we would go and just be there as a resource and an informative source for interested parties and for people who just want to know, what's changing, what do I have to look forward to. So it's definitely important for us, and I think it's been beneficial to the farmer too.
Right. And now you guys, I guess, are relying more heavily on technology, online resources, in a post-COVID world.
Yeah, certainly. Last year, I think everybody was just trying to figure out what does existing in this world look like.
Yeah.
So, a lot of the opportunity for outreach and communication was really, everybody was kind of concerned with handling their own business, and rightfully so. So, we didn't do a lot of outreach last year, but this year certainly. There are digital conferences coming up, and we're having those meetings. Still not as frequent, still not in person, but trying to revitalize that. Spending a lot of time on Teams and a lot of time on Zoom. So,
Yeah.
which is good. It's good to be back out there. I was getting a little bit lonely, cooped up in my office, just day to day.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, farming's always been a very communal type of line of work. So it's tough when you don't have that, face-to-face interaction, right? Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Um, I'd be curious to change gears a little bit and learn a little bit about how you guys are handling the incoming USDA final regs. How are you guys are getting that into the farmers' hands? Probably similar to with the Zooms and such. But how are you guys doing in terms of getting those new regulations put in place? How did that affect you? Were you happy with them?
Yeah, so the 2018 Farm Bill and the USDA Domestic Hemp Production Program has certainly thrown a major hurdle to all states, really, when it comes to industrial hemp. Certainly, the interim final rule was not very popular with anyone. I think it just with the diversity that you see in existing pilot programs, it was just really, it really created a bottleneck that I don't think a lot of programs could tolerate, and North Carolina included, and it was going to be a hardship on farmers, especially farmers from programs that were perhaps a little bit more liberal in their pilot programs than the interim final rule. And of course, the USDA, I have to give them credit where credit is due. They held lots of, meetings and webinars and conferences, and they did their research, and they had multiple comment periods, and they have ultimately revised that interim final rule into what we have today, which is the final rule. And it's significantly better. It's a lot more palatable to a lot more people, including the grower. Growers would love to have that, definition of hemp changed to 1%. We didn't get that, of course, but it did improve significantly. And that's, for North Carolina, that's one of the biggest challenges coming forward, is making that transition from our pilot program into the USDA's program. And, we're working on it. I'm sitting on a committee right now to try to develop some recommendations to states who are still ready to submit plans. We have a Hemp Regulators group, and we get together on a bi-monthly basis. And as a part of that, we put together a panel to try to make recommendations about performance-based sampling, because one of the requirements that was, from a labor standpoint, for departments of ag, was like sampling everybody if you have a really large program is a really daunting task, not only from a money standpoint, but from labor and really just from all corners. That's very difficult to do. And so performance-based sampling is a really interesting piece of the USDA final rule, which allows states, some freedom to use data, to use just to better use their resources, and maybe not go get everyone when everyone doesn't pose the same risk to non-compliance. And so, the state of North Carolina is working on it, I guess, is the takeaway. We're in communication with USDA. We're talking to those other states who are also, who also have larger programs, who are making that transition, and we're trying to navigate, that as smoothly as possible.
This is something you guys proposed, or in the process of proposing.
Well, so we have not proposed a plan to USDA, right? There's two basic options, which is USDA can run the program for you, or you can submit a plan for approval, and you can run your program. And we have some sort of program tenants put together, but North Carolina and some other states have. It's not always just as easy as, I want to submit a program to USDA.
Right.
There are other, there are formalities that have to be recognized, and sometimes law has to be changed. And so North Carolina does have some of that, that will potentially need to be rectified if we want to run our own program. Either way, hemp's going to be available for the North Carolina farmer, even if it's through USDA. And ultimately, I'll be here to make sure that the farmers have whatever resources they need to successfully make that transition. That's kind of where we're at. It's a lot of things up in the air, a lot of moving parts, and all of it's in concrete yet.
Yeah, no, I'm still thinking about the sampling and trying to get to whatever you said, 1,500 licensees potentially. Like, what did that look like?
Their lots, right? So one licensee may have multiple lots. So yeah, the numbers add up really quickly.
Yeah, what did that look like last year logistically for you guys?
Well, last year, with COVID, it was very different. 2019 was really a record year for us. Tell
me about that one, kind of in a normal world.
Well, that was also the year where we added 900 licensees. So in terms of workload, it was, all of my field staff they worked as hard as they could every day, sun up, sundown, basically. A lot of long hours to get to as many people as possible. And ultimately, we, as a state, had to make some decisions to reduce that workload, just because we weren't going to get to everyone. We weren't going to get to all of the lots, and it's not reasonable. It's not really fair to the farmer either to say, hey, well, I can't come to you, so you're just going to have to wait 2 or 3 weeks. Well, we know with hemp that doesn't work from a compliance standpoint. that puts them at risk, and they're already undertaking a lot of risks. So we effectively made decisions to sort of performance-based sampling, sort of in a fledgling primitive form, to make to use our data to say, hey, people who are growing maybe this strain that we've seen a lot of and have been for years, or who have been testing very consistently, like we're just not going to go get this sample. We're going to send them a letter, sort of a compliance testing waiver. That's what we call it. And so that was 2019. I mean, there was so much work to be done that we had to create a way to lighten the load. With 2020, and COVID, and not wanting to expose, not only our people, but the farmers potentially to COVID. There was definitely a period of time where we just didn't take compliant samples. Now that was earlier in the year, and as more guidance came out, we adapted our protocols to be able to go get those tests. It's rarely anything more than a one-on-one interaction. We could maintain social distancing, but it drastically reduced our numbers because, you had a lot of farmers, there's just a lot of people in general that had so much going on that, hemp really wasn't at the forefront of their minds. And so,
Right.
yeah, 2020 was a different kind of year, but, if say 2022 was to be anything like 2019, then I'd either need more labor, or we'd need to be able to make the decision to not sample everyone. And so again, that's why that's such an important piece of the USDA's proposed final rule. Is to be able to do that is important for anybody with a large program.
Yeah. Uh, or 10, 30, 50 licensees. It's very different than your program. So, giving leeway to have a little bit of flexibility based on size of your program or other, geographic factors makes sense.
Sure.
Change gears a little bit from here. I wanted to get into the supply chain of things because, COVID tamped numbers down across the country in 2020, but just prior to that, we saw, supply chain massive correction in price in terms of the commodity, and on the CBD side specifically. What have you seen in terms of like market dynamics in your state regarding supply chain, farmers connecting with processors, et cetera?
Well, I mean, that's definitely one of the major industry-wide issues in my opinion. We as a state have not really, we haven't passed any legislation to regulate after harvest. So, my division, we cover, aiding and licensing, and then moving through all the way to the point where compliance, and then the farmer harvests, and then he's got to move his product somewhere, right? He needs to sell it to turn a profit, to make sure sort of that whole industry moves along. And we opted to register processors, which is not the same as licensing them. It's basically a formality so that we can keep track of them and vouch for them if there's like a legal issue, because hemp is fraught with legal issues, where, somebody could be operating a completely legitimate hemp business, but, from the outside, from perhaps someone who hasn't heard or is less educated on what's going on with hemp in the world, can cause that kind of issue. So, that process or registration list has been useful to some, to make that connection between the farmer and somebody who can potentially, handle the material. But I think, early on, especially in our program, and I think in maybe a lot of others, I don't want to generalize too much about what everybody else has going on, but we were hearing these sort of astronomical values for CBD, $10, $15 per percentage point per pound. I mean, whatever, if you've got 10%, and you make a pound per plant, you plant 2,000 plants, I mean, per acre. I mean, that's the numbers go,
The numbers are crazy.
they look really, really good, especially for farmers who are operating on razor thin margins for things like, corn for silage or soybeans or whatever. where it's all about efficiency. It was
Hmm.
well, anybody can slap this in the ground and just make a mountain of money, and that sort of gold mine mentality kind of kicked things off, which I think is why we saw that market correction that you referred to, which is, we had a ton of people planting it, and some of them had contracts. They had kind of laid that groundwork. Some of them didn't, and the ones that had contracts, some of those contracts were honored and some of them weren't. I think one of the interesting and unfortunate bottlenecks for the industrial hemp supply chain is processing, and for those companies that want to do large scale extraction, I mean, that's an extremely expensive startup.
Yeah.
Even if you go for a small piece of equipment, at one of the regulator conferences I attended, we went and saw a manufacturer of extraction equipment, and even one that fits in a 10 by 10 by 10 space, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it doesn't do a ton of volume. And if you go to something like supercritical CO2 extraction or what have you, I mean, it only goes up from there. And those
Right.
businesses invested a ton of money, and then got product and made promises and made contracts. And then, you know, because the next step in the chain wasn't well developed, like those processors very quickly lost all of their money, because they invested it in the business and they were not seeing the money come back fast enough to
Right.
sustain.
If they couldn't sell it.
Yeah, so and that sort of created this whole backwash where, I mean, I've still got farmers calling me today that are saying, I've got material from 2019 that I'm still in my
Mm,
barn. And that is just, I hate to hear that. It is extremely unfortunate, but I mean, I think realistically at this point in time, that material was probably trash.
right.
Just because, to keep that material crisp, I mean, there's a lot that goes into that as well. I mean, it's not as easy as just pulling it out the field and dropping it off and getting paid. And I think that's what a lot of people thought early on, and it just isn't. And so that dynamic, I think, it has shrunk significantly, that supply chain, but I think what exists now is more stable. It just
Mhm.
doesn't support as many growers right now
Right.
because it's sort of more of I mean, a more like a smaller, more intimate relationship than your typical big business transaction.
Right.
And we've also seen a lot of vertical integration with our farmers that are going from seed to sale. They're
Mm,
doing their own extractions and they're formulating their own, tinctures or balms or whatever it is they might be interested in. And that's just been a way for at least them to mitigate some of their own risk and move the product and sort of get that flow established. And that's, are all the big processors gone? Probably not. But can they sustain all of the growers in North Carolina? No. Can they sustain all the growers that are going to come on board as a part of this, transition to USDA's program? Absolutely not. So the problem is getting better, but it's not solved. And the
right.
further we can diversify what hemp is going into, I think the better and more quickly we will resolve that overall problem.
Gosh, that's a segue if I've ever heard one. Let's talk industrial then. That's a great segue. I was gonna poke more, but I was like, hey, that was perfect. So tell me about industrial hemp in North Carolina. Obviously, it's what people are interested in the long term. CBD kind of started the conversation. Where's it been going in the industrial front?
Well, the industrial front was almost forced in the beginning. I mean, truly,
Mm,
2017, we're importing seed from Europe, and it's for grain and it's for fiber. And again, there's no place in the state of North Carolina that processes hemp fiber or hurd or any of that. And there's certainly nobody that I know of that handles whatever hemp for grain. And so that's kind of where it started, and everybody was like, well, what do we do with this? There was no clear market. And of course then, various pieces of legislation happened and opened it up so that you can get CBD seed from elsewhere, and of course that created the problem we just talked about. So but it's making a resurgence now. And it's not an industry without issue as well. Maybe less than CBD and the cannabinoid side of things, but I'd say here in North Carolina, fiber is sort of it's what people have their eyes on if they're looking at industrial now. I don't hear too much about hemp seed for grain. I see it in supermarkets. So I know there are people who are out there that produce it and that buy it, and that maybe that's not here. That could be coming from Canada. I'm not sure, but fiber is where people are looking certainly here. And I think the reason for that is, at least here in North Carolina, is a history of textile production. I mean, you can still ride through the Piedmont and see mills that made socks and hosiery, or they made denim or whatever, and they're there. And of course, many of them, or maybe even most, aren't in operation at this point in time. I mean, I've seen them being converted into fancy lofts and whatnot, but it still exists. I've been to some of these facilities, and they have interest in working in hemp, but some of that is, they're designed to work with things like denim and things like cotton, and hemp is not like either. And so there's development that must happen there as well. But I think that given our location, we're surrounded by ports. We have our own ports. I think for the farmer who perhaps is jaded about the sort of process and general happenings of what's going on with cannabinoid hemp, I think fiber hemp may be the ticket for them. You grow it a whole lot more like you would a standard row crop, and the process would be very similar. Ultimately, when that infrastructure develops, you grow it until you get maximum fiber length, you cut it down, it rests in the field, then it gets baled, and you take it to a decortication facility, just like you would take cotton to a gin. And so that aspect of it, I think, if we can get the infrastructure in place, it's going to be really, really good. And I think there are major companies. I've heard whispers through the grapevine of Patagonia and Vans and other big name companies that are potentially interested in hemp, especially with eco-friendly initiatives and those kinds of things and being green. I think there will be interest in that, and that's where the money will come from to help build these facilities that will then ultimately create the supply chain for hemp. And I think that's where fiber is headed if things go well. And we have we've had a lot more fiber acreage to be planted this year, assuming it all gets planted, than in the past several years. So that's exciting, and I'm glad to see that. And I really hope that gets that really gets going and gets established, because again, I think that's more palatable to the farmer who's into it for that more traditional row crop, to just add something back in. And fiber is just one avenue, right? I mean, we've got bioplastics and hempcrete and other, generic industrial, super absorbent polymers and these sort of fringe like things that could be extremely useful, but I don't know how many growers it's going to sustain. But those are other things that I'm hearing about, certainly, and their applications are varied.
Yeah. I was going to ask, are farmers looking at industrial hemp as potentially something to rotate in to a normal kind of like as they do their crop cycles, since it is like more traditional?
I mean, I think that's probably a question on many people's mind.
Yeah.
Here, I think you got a lot of corn bean rotations, because corn heavy nitrogen, it pulls a lot of nitrogen out of the soil, whereas you follow it up with soybeans and legumes, and you try to add some of that nitrogen back. I think where hemp's going to come in is, as we do more research about hemp and its sort of bioaccumulation properties, its ability to pull out things like heavy metals or pesticide residues, I think hemp may be, it may prove to be useful as more of a remediation tool. And assuming that material that has been used to remediate soil to bring it back into a place where it is usable for other things, that if that's also usable for fiber, and doesn't pose any health risk or anything like that, then that would really be something, right? Because now you've got land that is potentially not useful for whatever reason right now, because of whatever agricultural use over the years that sort of rendered it, put it in a bad way, and then you can take that, remediate it, gain that property back, and then still create something out of it. I mean, that would be huge. So that remains to be seen, but it's definitely something that it could be possible with him. And I think in terms of rotation, that's where it would go. Because I don't know that hemp is putting anything back the same way that say soybeans would, but it may
Right.
be taking some things out with also in a positive way.
That makes a lot of sense. That's cool. I mean, going back to the industrial thing, just from what you were saying earlier, I think it's awesome that, what I've been seeing in every state is kind of industrial hemp looking to fill a void from a previous industry that was in the state, or maybe still is, but into a lesser capacity than the heyday. So like textiles in North Carolina, like I think that's so cool that there's possibility that hemp can kind of bring a resurgence to that area, because that's kind of what it was touted as, right? This economic developer that can kind of touch so many different industries.
No, absolutely. I mean, everyone when hemp first came around, it was like 99,000 uses and counting, and
Right.
maybe so, and that'd be awesome. Eh, I mean, I can't even begin to fathom what all those 99,000 uses could be, but I mean, I guess with enough time and research and clever thinking, it could be that many. So, but that was definitely how it was touted, and hopefully that's true, because if we can develop even a tenth of those, it's going to really broaden and hopefully help those markets recover.
Right. Absolutely. I don't know if I have any other questions. I think we covered a ton of ground here. It was great to chat with you. Any parting thoughts or anything you want to say to your North Carolina farmers before they probably just starting to get plants in the ground? No.
Yeah, I mean, definitely in the Far East, they either have them in the ground or they're planting now. But I think for my farmers that are out there, of course, I'm always available, as best I can be to them for whatever issues they have. I think I just want to, reassure them that like industrial hemp is not going away from North Carolina. We have a transition to make. It is not going to be without its bumps and bruises. Nothing ever is, but we will absolutely make that transition. I'll be here to assist with that, whatever that looks like, whether we submit our own plan or whether we're under USDA's. Hemp will be here, and we'll be here to help. And 2022 will be a new year, and hopefully a better year for everyone who wants to be involved with him. And right now our application has some hurdles in it. It's possible that those are going to go away, and that industrial hemp cultivation will be open to even more people. So we'll see, but we're not going anywhere.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think they're in great hands. You're super knowledgeable, and I only hope the best for North Carolina. I hope you guys continue to plant your flag in the industry.
I hope so. I'd like to think that we came out firing and have been an example to some, and I hope we can continue to do so.
Excellent. Hey, Paul, I really appreciate your time. It was great to chat with you, and have a great season.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Glad to be here. Maybe we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. I'd love that. Thanks so much. Take
Have a
care.
good